Hey friend, are you just starting your lock journey? Or maybe you're thinking about starting your locks and you know you want a certain look and maybe you want thick locks, but you don't really know how to start your locks in order to get thick locks and what your lock count should be versus what your hair density is and all the intricacies. So today I'm gonna give you some tips on how to get thick locks by starting your locks a particular way. So let's get into it. So my name is Lauren, and on this channel I talk about lock tips for your journey, whether you're starting or whether you've been in it for a long time, with an emphasis on semi-freeform locks. So if you enjoy that type of content, then you can subscribe. I've had my locks personally for about 5.5 years, and I've always been kind of blessed with thicker hair. But when I was younger, I used to get teased for having a unibrow and a little peach fuzz right here. But when I was older, it paid off because my hair grows really fast. And because I've always had thick hair, I knew when I first started my lock journey that I would also have thick locks. But a lot of you all also comment and say that you want thick locks. And we don't always have the same hair density, hair type, hair texture, etc. to get the same lock size, even if we have the same lock count. So what does all this mean? First, we gotta talk about thick locks versus full locks. So if you know you want thick locks, think about what type of look you want, more so than the type of locks or the size of locks that you want. I say that because I have seen people with my same lock size, like medium to thick locks, but they have a lower lock count. And I've also seen people with my same lock size who have a higher lock count. And lock count doesn't matter as much to the thickness of the locks. Do you want each individual lock to be thicker, to be bigger, or do you just want a fuller head of hair? So if you want thicker and bigger locks, if you have thick hair like me, meaning you have high density hair, you have a lot of strands on your head, you'll probably have no problem getting a full look to your locks. However, if you are someone who has low density hair, meaning you don't have a thick appearance to your hair and maybe your hair strands are also thinner, if you went for thick locks like around my size of locks, your hair and your locks in general would not look as thick. It wouldn't look as full either. However, if someone with low density hair had more locks, like say 100 to 150 locks, their hair could look more full. So that's why I'm saying if you want a more full, less scalpy look with your locks, look at your hair density first and know what your hair density is. You can kind of test your hair density by looking at your natural hair in different styles. Someone with low density hair, if they were to do individual braids or cornrows or mini twists, maybe their hair wouldn't look as full, or you would see more of their scalp. So do you see more of your scalp or less of your scalp when you do braided, parted hairstyles? So now this is a matter of thick locks versus full locks. Thick locks is when the circumference around the lock is wider. You may not want that if your goal is really full locks or a full head of hair. That might require a different parting pattern, less locks, and also more patience to see what your hair looks like when it does start to bud and mature, which I'll talk about later in the video. Now let's talk about your parting size versus your hair density. So if you're just starting your lock journey, you may be wondering, if you haven't started already, you may be wondering, how do I start my locks and what my lock count should be? Some people have asked me what my lock count is. I've told them. That may or may not help you in your journey if you don't look at your hair density first. So assuming that you've already looked at your hair density, you can now understand the lock count that is right for you for the fullness that you want for your hair. If you have lower density hair and you want fuller locks, a good range of your lock count could be anywhere between 100 locks and 150 locks if you have lower density hair. If you have thinner hair or less full hair. That way, the more locks that you have, the more, so to speak, gaps you can fill in your scalp, and also the more volume over time you can have once your locks start to mature, and also the more potential for volume. If you have higher density hair and you still want a thick look to your locks, you can still go for that 100 to 150 lock count. You will have more volume, probably more volume than I have with my locks. But keep in mind, my locks are also long, so they've matured. Or you want still thick locks, but you want less volume. Then you could go for a lower lock count, like I did. I started with actually 74 locks, and then over time combined a couple locks, and now I have 68. And as far as your parting size is concerned in your parting system, you can expect your lock, once it starts to mature, to be the size of your part. So just to show you my part-to-loc ratio. You can't really see my parts because I'm actually semi-free-forming my locks, so I don't clean up my parts at all. I haven't cleaned up my parts in like 5 years. But just imagine you can see the part a little bit better. So the thickness and size of this lock is actually the thickness of the part that it started with. And that is how my hair is all around my scalp. And part-to-loc ratio is really important when considering what your lock count is, assuming, again, you've already considered your hair density beforehand. Because over time, if your lock size is a lot smaller than the size of your part, that can lead to breakage. And a lot of the times, if you have low density hair and you have a thinner look to your hair, if you start with really wide parts because you assume that that's going to give you thicker locks, and then over time it doesn't give you thicker locks because, again, you have lower density hair, that can also lead to breakage and thinning over time that you have your locks. So part-to-loc ratio, just remember that term and remember the importance that that has on the health of your locks over time while you're starting your locks. All right, next we're gonna talk about starting your locks on your own versus going to a loctician. But before we do, I wanna give a shout out to all the Patreon members who have joined in the last few weeks. I appreciate you all, and I welcome you all to the community and appreciate your support. So I do have a Patreon for creative corner. If you are an artist, if you make art, poetry, or anything like that, we gather once a week to share our art and also for a coaching session. And then I also have a higher tier if you want to move with me, stretch with me, practice yoga with me. I do 2 yoga classes a week on the Patreon. So you can find that link in the description box of this video. So parting your hair or starting your locks by yourself will require some patience. I started my locks by myself, and I've never actually been to a loctician. And the parting system with which you start your locks is very important, not only the size, but also you want to have parts that are in windows. The best parting system for full looking locks is hands down the brick layering parting system. I think that's what I'm saying right. Brick layer parting system. So you know how the bricks of a house, the bricks of a building are like in layers. So the first row is in the windows of the second row and so on and so on. They're staggered, basically. You want your parts to be staggered. And this is how I started my parts as well. Because whether you have high density hair or low density hair, if the row of locks above this row is directly covering the row below it, you won't be able to see the locks. However, if the row below it is staggered to the row above it, you'll create a more full look. And the parting system just makes more sense. I wouldn't pay that much attention to whether your parts are all equal or even. Some areas of your hair are gonna be higher density than others. And I didn't know this about my hair when I first started my locks, but later on I found out that the crown of my head is higher density than the bottom of my head. So once my locks started to mature, I realized that the locks at the top of my head are a lot thicker than the ones at the bottom. And really, this is like the side of my head. You see such a difference in those two sizes. And the part is similar. Like the part is a similar size. So even as far as like part to loc ratio is concerned, even if all of your parts are even, sometimes the lower density parts of your hair will just grow in more thin than the higher density parts of your hair. So that rule is a rule of thumb, but it doesn't necessarily apply in all situations. And every head of hair is different. That's why on this channel, I advocate for everyone to be their own loctician, which means don't rely on someone else, whether it be your loctician, whether it be your sibling or your family, auntie, cousin who does your hair, to fully know more about your hair than you do. Take the time out to learn your hair. But I also think the learning period of learning your hair before or even during your lock journey is a beautiful thing. And I don't think there are any mistakes with locks. Just learning periods, but no mistakes. Some people have also asked me on this channel, does the parting shape matter as far as affecting your hair's thickness? For example, square parting versus C-shape parting versus diamond parting. And I just say, it doesn't matter. Your lock size is your lock size, and your hair density is your hair density. So the shape that you put your parts in does not matter. It does not make a difference in terms of how thick your locks will be. Crocheting, then having a parting shape like diamonds is very specific and requires a lot of shape ups to your lock parts. And it requires a lot of precision to maintain, more so than, let's say, C-shaped parting, which is literally just a round oval, or maybe even square-shaped parting. Over time, if you want your parts to last, if you are going to a loctician, if you do like that clean-cut look, consider your parting shape for that. But as far as thickness, maybe it doesn't matter as much. Something super important to note about your locks, whether you have low density hair or high density hair, whether you're starting with 60 locks or 160 locks, is that when your hair matures, it will start to drop. When your hair gets longer, it will start to drop, which means the volume that you once had when you had starter locks or in between the 1 and 2 year mark of your locks will no longer be as voluminous. Exhibit A, here are some pictures of me within the first 2 years of my lock journey. My locks were very voluminous, a lot more than they are now. You could tell that I had semi-freeform locks. You could tell that I didn't really retwist my locks, and you could tell that my roots were puffy. I like that look. I still have that look, and I still have the same maintenance routine now than I did in these photos. The only difference is the length of my locks. My locks are actually now tailbone length after 5.5 years of having them. And the length of your locks makes a huge difference in the appearance of how they look. If you once felt like you had thicker locks, once they do get longer, your locks will appear less thick. This is another thing that I want to emphasize about how important the part to loc ratio is. If you're starting off with thinner locks than what your parts are sectioned off as, over time, the longer your hair gets, the more important it is for the base of your locks to have a strong foundation. So then if that part section is really wide, but the lock that's in the part is really thin, over time, when you start to grow your hair out, that thinning can put a lot of strain on your locks. So just keep in mind that this is kind of creating an illusion. Your hair is going to change over time. The way that you start your hair will not be the way that it looks in 3 to 4 to 5 years. And be prepared to be okay with that. Be prepared that your hair is going to look different. Be prepared that this is a journey. And change is a good thing. Change is always a good thing. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. What questions do you have for me? Again, you can check out my Patreon in the description box below. And I hope to see you in the next video. All right, y'all. Peace.